Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Library Forum. I'm Andrea Morningstar-Gray, the Library Director, and we're welcoming Daniel Gross, who's going to talk to us about finding your place in the big, scary publishing industry for newly published or unpublished, or anyone after that.
Or anybody.
Okay, awesome. Take it away.
All right, great. All right, thanks for having me, guys. So, like Andrea said, I'll be talking about, everything is basically what I'm talking about here is geared toward new or unpublished writers. But as she said, that's kind of apply to everybody. There we go. Okay, so there's going to be two main things really that I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to first talk about my own experience as a serious writer over the last few years, and then I'll go into a section where I offer up some helpful tools that I've discovered during my time that I would want to pass along to you guys. And then at the end, I'll try to answer all of the questions that you guys have. So my first few years. So I began writing seriously in 2020. I was an English major at Kent State at the time, and I had kind of a general interest in writing, but I had never seriously pursued it. And so I did some math and determined that I could add a creative writing minor to my English major, and it wasn't going to extend my time at all at Kent State. So I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So I added that in there, and I've just kind of dove in headfirst ever since. So most of what I've learned over the last almost 5 years, I have pieced together incrementally, right? Just little nuggets of knowledge coming to me over time. And that's kind of what I've tried to collate here in this presentation. So the sources where my information comes from is other writers, college professors. I've attended a number of writing conferences. I listen to podcasts. Both of those I'll discuss a little later. And then I read books and I read other people's work. And the biggest thing of all is I just keep writing. I'm always writing, always working on the craft. Okay, so one thing I have thought about that is important to determine as a new writer is to clarify what you want to do with your writing, right? So do you want to write a novel and be traditionally published? That's going to take you down one path. Do you want to be a teacher? That's the path I'm going toward. Or do you want to write just for fun? Whatever lane you decide you want to pursue is going to kind of direct, how you learn and work with your writing. So it's always good to clarify that first. And another important thing that I've learned is that everybody runs this race at their own pace, right? There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to writing. A lot of folks will tell you things that have worked for them. That's kind of what I'm going to talk about, but maybe those things don't work for you. That's okay. Everybody has their own way of doing things. And there are two others I wanted to note here. One being Stephen King, right? We all know Stephen King. He's published 60 plus novels, seems to pump out 1 or 2 new ones every year. And then Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, right? She wrote one book. It's like one book versus all these other books, and both work, right? Both became famous authors. So no right or wrong way to go about learning and working on the craft of writing. Okay, so another big thing I've learned is that writing and getting published takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. And this was something I really, really underestimated when I first started writing. So the first thing I want to note is that nearly all publishers require completed work. So let's say you want to have work that is published. Publishers are going to require that your story or book or whatever you're submitting to them be a finished product according to you. It doesn't necessarily need to be finished according to them, but you want to submit the best possible work before people are even looking at your stuff. Okay, and there are really too few exceptions to even mention in that. The only one I can really think of is when it comes to writing nonfiction, sometimes publishers will accept or decline work based on a pitch, which again, I have to do a lot of legwork for that as well, but I'm not really going to get into that. But in short, if you're going to be submitting to publishers, your work needs to be completed. And then you need to figure out where you want to submit your work. So there's a lot of different options, which I'm going to talk about next. But there are kind of two approaches when it comes to figuring out where to submit. First is the approach of quality over quantity. So let's say you write a horror story, right? And that's genre fiction. So you can submit it to just a few horror or publishers that specifically publish horror fiction, right? That's going to be better quality, but you're limiting your options on how many publishers you're submitting to. So your odds of being accepted kind of decrease. Then there's the opposite of that, where you can go for quantity over quality. And this is the school of thought that I've kind of found to be more beneficial. So if you submit your work to 30 different publishers, maybe they don't all fit exactly what you've written, but you meet the general guidelines that they are looking for, that's going to give you a greater opportunity to get published. Okay, and then once you've figured out where to submit, you have to figure out how to submit. So I'll get a little more into this later, but every publisher kind of has their own rules about how they want to see the work that's submitted to them. So that's another thing that adds to the time consumption of it all. You have to make your work look how publishers want it to look when they get it. And everybody has their own rules, so everybody's a little different, so you got to do it a million different times. And then once you've figured out where and figured out how, then you can start sending out those submissions, which again is extremely time consuming. And to speed up this process, I recommend templates, which I will also show you later on. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about the different publishing options that exist out there. So first I'm going to start with the really big guys, and then I'm going to work down to the smaller guys. Okay, so in the publishing world, there are what are called the big five publishers, and they're the five names on the board there. These are the biggest publishers in the world. They control roughly 80% of the market for traditionally published books. And traditionally published just means, there is the publisher, they have their own editors, they do everything themselves, they do all the marketing. It's a whole process. And this is generally speaking related to novels and full books, nonfiction and novels. So the big five, yeah, those are the big names. You hear those a lot at like writing conferences or just floating around on the internet. If you look on the spine of a book, you're probably going to see one of these names. So these five names, also another statistic, will publish 10 to 20% of all brand new titles that are published in any given year. So 20% from these five names. Everybody else gets the rest of it. And then of these names, Penguin is the biggest, followed by Hachette Book Group. So those are the really big guys, and this is kind of what novelists sometimes aspire to. Very low odds that any work would actually ever get published there, but it is kind of the Mount Olympus of publishing. Okay, and then stepping down from the big five, there are a couple different options. This is still in the world of you've written an entire book and you're trying to get a book published. There are independent presses. So Grey Wolf Press and Tin House are a couple of popular names. Let's see, Grey Wolf, according to their website, they publish 30 to 35 books per year. Tin House publishes about 24. So if you think of all the books that are being submitted, there are hundreds or thousands of submissions sent to any one of these presses in a given year, and they're publishing 20 to 30 to 40, somewhere in that range. So though the odds are slim, it's still a good publishing option and something to kind of strive for. So, and then after the independent presses, you have university presses. So I included University of Akron, Kent State, and Ohio State because they're local. Most people are not aware that university presses exist, and in as many numbers as there are a lot of universities that have their own presses. Maybe Ohio State, you might assume, has something like this. Ohio State publishes 50 to 60 books per year, whereas Akron only does like 10, but they don't do fiction. When I was doing research, their website pretty much just talked about poetry. And then Kent State is in the same neighborhood as Gray Wolf. They do about 35 books per year. So there are a lot of different options there as well. Okay, and then we get to the smaller guys, right? This is where we're going to be publishing things like short stories, poetry. And this is a great place for the new or recently published or unpublished author to start. These are what are called literary magazines. So in the world of literary magazines, there are hundreds of, if not thousands of literary magazines out there. But there are big names, medium names, and small names as well within this world. So the big names include the New Yorker. They're probably the biggest name of all, right? And I don't even think the New Yorker accepts, they do accept work from anybody, but what they actually publish is generally work that they solicit from a writer. So they contact the writer and are like, hey, write something, we want to publish it. And then Plowshares is another, it's associated with a university in the Boston area. I think it's Emerson College. Don't quote me on that. But it is associated with the university, but it is one of the bigger names as well in the world of literary magazines. And then there are medium names, which include West Branch and Bond Magazine. If you go and Google any of these, you can find their website very easily. You can read everything that they publish. Very few of them have paywalls or things you have to sign up for to be able to read their work. And it's all very, very fun, and you can read a lot of work doing this way. And then you have the smaller names, which include magazines like Smoke Long Quarterly and the Saturday Evening Post. And then there are also university magazines. So Hiram, here we have the Hiram Poetry Review. Similar fashion, the Georgia Review at the University of Georgia. If I did not include the Georgia Review in the university magazine category, it would actually be up in the big name category. So just because it's a university magazine doesn't mean it's a small project. It can be really big. But then there's also a magazine called Quarter After 8 at Ohio University. There are a lot of universities out there that have opportunities to submit your work for publication. And the reason I separate university magazines out is that their staffs are typically made up of college students, either in their Masters of Fine Arts program or creative writing or English. One of those departments, the students and the professors usually run those magazines. So lots of opportunity, and these are not the only names. Like I said, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of literary magazines out there, and I'm going to explain the easy way to find them in a little while. Okay, so those are a lot of different publishing options. There's one other thing I wanted to discuss regarding publishing options, and that is writing contests. So writing contests are typically run by the publishers. They are different in that there's typically a special guest judge that will come in to judge the work submitted for the contest, and there's also typically a prize for winning. But as you see there in big letters, I wrote that I don't recommend these. I just wanted to mention them here because they do exist. And the reason I don't recommend them is that they're often very expensive to enter. $20 to $100 is the typical range. And your chances of winning are roughly the same as submitting work to the magazine on a normal basis, right? But on a normal basis, they're not necessarily charging you a reading fee. Most magazines don't charge a reading fee. If they do, it's usually very small, $3 or $4. Just kind of covers the fee that they're charged for whatever submission platform they're using to collect submissions. But contests are very expensive. Now, if a contest is free to enter, go crazy, absolutely. And I actually want to mention here, I didn't include it in my PowerPoint because I just learned yesterday that Hiram has a free contest, nonfiction contest. I just got an email about it yesterday. And I think the winner gets something like $300, and it's just for students here on Hiram's campus. I'm like, your odds are great. It's a very small pool. And there's a prize for first, second, and third. So 100% go for that. That's one I absolutely would recommend entering. If you have writing, I think it's nonfiction up to 5,000 words. So definitely recommend that. But in general, I don't recommend contests. Okay. Now, I also wanted to discuss the need for patience, right? So if you're like me, like when I'm writing, I write very fast and I pump out a lot of words, and my short stories get done pretty quickly. But then I submit it, and then it's a big game of hurry up and wait, right? So if you write a book and you're publishing a novel, that process can take anywhere from 4 to 6 years from the time you start writing until it's published. And I'm using a 12 to 18 month estimate on on the actual writing time of that. So if you take longer to write, that window of time is going to be longer still. The big literary magazines, so like the Georgia Review or the New Yorker, right? They take a really long time to get back to you because they have so many submissions to get through and only a couple of readers. It just takes a lot longer for them to get back to you. The university literary magazines are usually a little quicker because they don't accept submissions all year round. But at the same time, it is usually a group of students that are reading it. So as you guys know, there's a lot going on. Medium literary magazines, 2 to 4 months. Small literary magazines, 1 to 3 months. And if you're lucky, anything less than that. So the trade-off here is you get a response quicker, but if your work is published, it's published in a smaller market. So not quite as many readers, but publication is a publication. At the end of the day, you can add any publication to your resume and it's going to count just as much as pretty much any other publication with a few exceptions, right? If you're published in the New Yorker, that's awesome. Your career has been made. Yeah, most of the places kind of count the same. Okay, and then another thing I want to talk about right there at the bottom, the term simultaneous submissions. When I started writing, I heard this from a couple of my professors, didn't know what it meant, right? And it's a term that gets used a lot in the publishing world. So simultaneous submissions means that you are submitting the same story to multiple magazines, right? So I'm gonna back up here for a second. So let's say I submit a story to West Branch, and then I also submit a story to Smoke Lawn Quarterly. So that is considered a simultaneous submission. I've submitted one story to multiple locations. The vast majority of literary magazines will accept simultaneous submissions, but there are some that don't. The reason that most places accept simultaneous submissions is that it's a difficult ask to expect exclusivity on a submission when the process typically takes a really long time to get back to you with a decision. Right? So if they do not accept simultaneous submissions, they expect that you are not submitting that work elsewhere while they're reading it. Okay, so in general, I recommend only submitting to magazines that accept simultaneous submissions. That way you can spread your work out to a lot of different people at the same time. Now, in the event that your work is accepted, so let's say I've submitted one story to 5 different places, right? And my work is accepted at magazine A. So I've got to let everybody else know who has my work to no longer consider it. Because another thing is that most magazines only want to consider unpublished work, previously unpublished work. So when your work is published, you got to take it off the market from everybody else. So you got to go back and write a lot of emails and be like, hey, my work's been accepted elsewhere. Please don't consider it anymore. But simultaneous submissions is a big term, one important to remember. Okay, so now I want to tell you a little story about a couple of pieces that I wrote. The first story is called The Age of Death, and these two stories that I wrote have very different paths to publication, which is why I found it important to talk about here. So The Age of Death. I started writing this short story in February of 2022, and when I finished it, I'm like, this is the best thing I've ever written. This is awesome. It's going everywhere right away. I submitted it to a bunch of different literary magazines and then played the waiting game, waiting for everybody to get back to me. I'm like, this is going to be accepted right away. But it didn't. All the magazines came back rejection. I'm like, okay, no big deal. So in 2023, after all the rejections came back and it was no longer out in the world, I'm like, all right, I guess I got to rewrite this thing because it's not getting accepted in its current form. So I rewrote the entire thing. I cut about 35% of the story. It started out around 6,000 words total. I cut it down to about 4,000. but I found I didn't actually lose any of the story when I did that. So I'm like, oh, I was just really wordy here. That's probably why no one was accepting it. So I'm like, this is great. I made it better. Send it out again, all rejections. I'm like, what do I got to do? What do you want from me? So I took it back, and in 2024, I rewrote the entire thing again. I'm like, all right, I got to change something. So I originally written it in third person and past tense. I changed it to first person present tense. So complete flip flop. I'm like, all right, this is the one. This is going to get accepted. Send it out into the world again. And this time I had a new problem. And the new problem was that it was accepted twice before I could withdraw it. And I actually didn't know, though, that it was accepted twice. It was a whole drama. So it shouldn't have happened, honestly. The first magazine that accepted it apparently published it a couple of days after I submitted it to them, but they didn't bother telling me. I got no email saying, hey, good job, we're accepting your work. Got nothing. So then what ended up being the second acceptance, I thought was the first acceptance, came around. They informed me they did it correctly. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to go withdraw from everybody else. I send my withdrawal email to the first place, and they're like, whoa, what are you talking about? We already published this. And I'm like, no, you didn't. They're like, yeah, we did. It's right here. So I go and I look on their website, and there it is. So I'm like, okay, super. The reason I was upset I wouldn't have really been upset if, two places online wanted to publish it. But the second place, it was actually accepted to be published in an anthology on a book that was going to bring me royalties. So I'm like, well, I want to go there. I don't want this first one. So I ended up working it out. It got published in both places. The second place just credited the first place as the people who published it first. So it worked itself out. In total, I sent that out 77 times. I received 63 rejections on the story, and then 12 withdrawals after it was accepted. So that's 75, and then the 2 acceptances. Now, the second story I want to talk about is called 2 Funerals. And I promise I don't just write about death. It just happened to be these 2 names, right? Okay, so 2 Funerals. This story was written about an event that took place this year, August 6th and 7th, that I attended. It was a funeral. I started writing the story. The story just kind of came into my brain all at once. I started writing it when I got home. The funeral was in Indiana. I returned home, immediately started writing on August 9th, finished writing August 22nd. And I'm like, okay, this is the best thing I've written now. So I'm sending this out immediately. But I felt like it was even better than everything I'd written before, like having that same feeling. So I'm like, I'm gonna kind of limit, I wanna just send it to some more reputable places first, see if I can get in a bigger name. So I sent it out to 16 different publications. I said I was only gonna start with 5, and then I accidentally did a bunch more because I was excited. The problem with this one is that the first publication to respond accepted it. And they responded 6 days after I submitted it. I'm like, okay, great. Now I just made myself a bunch more work because now I got to withdraw it from 15 places instead of 4. So I sent all the withdrawals, and it was published online on September 9th. So the event on which the story was based took place August 6th, and it was published September 9th. Very different from The Age of Death, which took 3 years and 2 complete rewrites. So my point here is that the path to publication is always going to be different. But whatever it is, it's okay. And sometimes you get lucky and the work gets published in a month. It just is what it is. More expected would be the first story with the many rejections and years of work to get it published. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the tools that I have found helpful in terms of finding places to get published. So these are the 4 I'm going to talk about. So first is a website called Chill Subs. If you haven't checked out Chill Subs, I would 100% recommend it. And then I'm going to talk about a website called Duotrope. Then it's a website called Poets and Writers, but they also have a magazine of their own. And then X, formerly Twitter. So you'd be surprised at how many literary magazines have presence on Twitter. So first thing I want to talk about is Chill Subs. Okay, so you go to chillsubs.com. This is their homepage, right? And they're basically Google for literary magazines. So if you're looking for a literary magazine, you go here and you search for it. So you can either click the Browse Opportunities button there, and the big black one in the middle, or you can click Browse up in the top right corner. Either one gets you to the same place. Okay, so when you click Browse, it takes you to this page. I have this sorted by most followers on Twitter, as you can see up there in the top right, which is how I got the big names up front. But the magazines will set up their own profile on Chill Subs, and they manage it themselves as well. So each one of these is like a little card that you can click on to get more information about the specific magazine. But from this screen, you can also search for a magazine, and it just searches all the, like if you just type like TO, it will pop up everything that has a TO in it. So there's literary magazines, you can search writing contests, they have indie presses, and then this thing, Medium, I haven't really worked with that much myself, but it's kind of similar to this, just like a different website that they partner with. So from here, there are, as you can see, 3,072 magazines show up in kind of the first screen there for the search on Chill Subs. So lots of opportunity, right? But you might want to try to find something a little more specific to what you've written. So you can use the filters over here. If you want to find something that's open for submission like that, you click that, it'll filter out everything that's currently, or all the magazines that are currently closed for submission. So the magazines that are not accepting submissions at this time, they all go away. You can check this box if you want to get rid of all magazines that charge a reading fee. This one is for magazines that will pay you when they accept your work. The vast majority of magazines do not pay you. There's just no money in this business, unfortunately. And then you can also sort by themed calls. So if you're looking for something specific, like you've written a horror story or a sci-fi story. And then you can also sort by the genre. So you have fiction, flash fiction, nonfiction, flash nonfiction, poetry, and other, which is kind of all the weird things that doesn't really have. A lot of different ways you can narrow this down, and you can use more than one of these at once. I like to filter down to about under 100 options, and then I just go through those and find the ones that I like. Okay, so the next screen I'm going to show you here, this is, so let's see the card here, and let's say this is for Canyon Review, and you click on the card. Okay, so it takes you to this screen. Okay, so I put this together back in September, which is why it says open until September 30th. So this is kind of like the top of the page that you'll see when you click on the card. And this little icon here is for how many people have bookmarked. So you have to create an account on Chill Subs before you can browse, but it's a free account. And then you can bookmark things that you like, so you can find them easily again later. Shows all the different genres that they accept. And then this screen is, if you're on the computer, I would just scroll down here. And that gets you all this information. So it tells you a little bit about the magazine. It shows you that they're currently open. So if they're closed, this will say closed. It shows you the deadline. There's when they were founded, where they're located. This is the link that will take you to their main website. This big button will take you to their submissions page. Okay? And then there's some highlights back here. This is generally the response time, the vibe that Chill Subs lists, very fancy, very impressive, very not fast, right? And then this is the acceptance rate. So you can also track your submissions through Chill Subs, and they use those tracked submissions to get the acceptance rate. So very small acceptance rate. This is not out of the ordinary. Right? I would say most magazines are in the 1 to 5% acceptance rate. So very slim odds, which is why, going back to the beginning, I prefer to take the numbers approach and just send my work out to as many people as possible to increase my chances of getting accepted. Okay, so let's pretend I clicked on the big black button that says submit. And then it takes you right to this page. This is the Kenyon Review's website, their submissions page. So the important thing to read here is the submission guidelines. Every magazine will list their submission guidelines on their website somewhere. Some are a little more difficult to find than others, but you got to track it down and read it carefully because this is where everybody's a little bit different. Okay, so it tells you that their submission portal is open from September 1st to September 30th. Kenyon Review is one of the university magazines that's associated with Kenyon College, but it also would be one of the big names if it was not a university magazine. Okay, so it looks like for this period, they will feature work based on these things. Right, so if you have just a work of literary fiction and then you get to this page and I'm like, oh, doesn't fit any of these things, you can move on to the next one. Okay, and then I'm gonna scroll down the page again, and this is more of their submission guidelines. So it doesn't say anything specifically about simultaneous submissions on this page. If it doesn't say anything, which is rare, I just happened to pick this one, and when I was reading through it, I'm like, oh, they don't mention simultaneous submissions here. If they don't mention that, you can either reach out to the editors and be like, hey, do you accept simultaneous submissions or not? Or you can just assume that they do, right? Because you can't get in trouble if they didn't tell you. So this is the important information, the really important information. So first off, they don't charge a reading fee. That's good to know. You can submit them for free. We consider previously unpublished works of short fiction and essays, flash fiction and essays, poetry, and excerpts. Okay, and then the other important information is right here. So it says you may submit to more than one genre, however, please submit no more than one submission in a given genre. Multiple submissions in the same genre will be disregarded. So there's a difference between simultaneous submissions and multiple submissions, right? Simultaneous submissions, as I mentioned, one story to a bunch of different places. Multiple submissions is multiple stories to the same place, right? So in this case, they say you can submit to more than one genre. So you can submit one short story, one work of flash, or 3 stories of flash fiction, 6 poems, and an excerpt from your novel and works. You can submit all that to them and they would read it. But if you submitted 2 short stories, they're going to be like, no, no. Okay, so that's important. And those are the things that change for every magazine. So you just have to read the information carefully and make sure you're submitting correctly. Okay, so another cool feature of Chill Subs is that you can create a writer's profile. Right, and you do have to do this to be able to browse, but you don't have to use all the functions of it in order to browse the opportunities. But I find this is a good alternative to creating a whole website just for your work. A lot of writers have a website for their work. I just use this tool. So I got a little bio there in the middle. These icons. So if I have a website, that way you can take whoever's here, click on this to my website. You can email on my Twitter, my Instagram, and I don't know. Okay, so you can edit the profile, you can add a profile button there, or you can add your work that's been published somewhere. So again, we scroll down the page, and I've separated these 2 pictures here. But this picture would appear above this stuff on the page. Okay, so this is the book I was telling you about that my short story was published in, the anthology. I didn't know it was going to look that cool when I uploaded it. I went, oh, cool, they got the cover on there and everything. So yeah, that's that. And then these are the other ones. So 2 Funerals was published in Hidden Peak Press. And then this little card here, when you click on it, it'll take you right to the website where it's published. So it's really easy to find other people's work that you want to read. So if you want to search for a writer on Chill Subs, you can look them up. If they have a profile, you can read their work very easily. And I've got 13 things on here. They only show 4 at a time, so you got to click the buttons down here to see the other work. Okay, so this one, 2 Funerals, was kind of published as like a blog post almost, so it just shows up all the text on one page. Easy enough. For this one, a story called Triangles, which was published earlier this year in Bitch and Kitsch, was kind of published as like an electronic magazine almost. So I give some more specific information, right? It's published in volume 15, issue 4, and then you got to go to page 49 and 80 to get to my story. Okay, Omelette and Apple in the Dark Journal is the same as this, in terms of how it's published. And then this is the other version of the Age of Best issue of mine. Give more specific information for that as well. Okay, so that is chill subs. Next thing I want to talk about is duotrope. So duotrope is similar to chill subs in regard to searching for literary magazines. There are a number of writers who prefer duotrope to chill subs. I am not one of them. You do have to sign up, and you do have to pay to use duotrope. So it's a small fee, small subscription fee to be able to search, which is one reason I prefer chill subs. Also, the functionality of the website I found a little more complicated to use. So I tried it. I tried the 30-day free trial. And actually, the Omelette story, the Apple in the Dark journal, was a journal I found on duotrope. So there's definitely tons of opportunity available on there, but you do have to sign up and pay to be able to find it all. Okay, and then I want to talk about Poets and Writers. This is a website. They have a lot of resources up here at the top. Right? And the main reason I wanted to include this particular page is because this is their magazine. And here on the cover is this person's name, daunting, which I'll kind of talk about here in a minute. Really it's something else, but just kind of put a pin in her name. But if you go to publisher writing, they have long lists of literary magazines. They have lists of agents. If you're looking for a literary agent, if you've written a novel and you want somebody to represent you, you can find people there. Okay, and then a lot of other tools as well. You just go on and play around with that. This is another one you have to create an account, but it doesn't cost anything. Okay, and then literary magazines on X, formerly Twitter. So the Bloomin' Onion is my literary magazine that I founded earlier this year. And this is kind of typically what you're going to see when you find a literary magazine on Twitter. So first I've got here that submissions are always open. Right? Most magazines are going to put on their page right up front, submissions are open or submissions are closed. We have a little bio here when we were established. Our first issue is forthcoming in April of next year. And then this is the link to my Twitter page, and then my wife runs this page, so she is linked on there as well. This link is to our website, and then you can see we got just over 1,000 followers. So that's pretty much what you'll see, but from here, if you find us, in 2 clicks, you click here, and then you click our submission guidelines on our website from the page this takes you to. So you're 2 clicks from our submission guidelines when you find us on Twitter. So I was very intentional about making it easy for people to find the information they need. Okay, and then I want to highlight a couple of other magazines. And each one of these I've included for a different reason. So first is a magazine called Ghost Like Lit. On their page, they write right here that submissions are closed. Okay, so I had ours up in the name up here, someone included in the bio. Okay, moving to the right, we have the Hulu Review. This one's cool because they're located in India, and I probably would have never heard of them if I hadn't found them on Twitter. So it's a great example of finding opportunities that you probably wouldn't have found any other way. And then the next one is the Write or Die magazine. Write or Die is associated with chill subs, and they're a paying market. They note there that they pay $25 to $200 for your work. Paying market's great. I haven't had any work that has paid me yet, so hopefully those royalties kick in soon, but nothing in the $25 to $200 range. There are some magazines that pay a lot more than that. So definitely good to know if they pay, that's a good opportunity. And then the last one is the Atlanta Review. So the Atlanta Review is a big name, obviously from Atlanta. But they're here on Twitter with everybody else, right? So I think of Twitter as a great tool to kind of equalize the opportunity, right? Everybody, whether you're a real big name or a small name, everybody looks the same when you're on here. And another cool thing is that on Twitter, the magazines tend to follow one another. So if you follow the Write or Die magazine and then you look through their followers, you're bound to find a number of other magazines that you can look into for opportunities as well. So it kind of just grows exponentially when you go down the rabbit hole. Okay, now I'm going to talk about templates. So I mentioned earlier that speeding up the process of submitting your work is vital, right? Because it takes a long time to write and submit your work to all these different magazines. So templates. Okay, so when you submit your work, almost every magazine wants to see a cover letter of some sort. So it doesn't have to be anything special. This is my cover letter that I use. So let me just read it in case you can't see it's kind of small font. So I say, my name is, starting, I say, dear editors. That's just kind of a great all-encompassing term to use rather than writing to somebody specific. So you got to go on their website and figure out who you're writing to, and you're not necessarily getting your work to them because you send it to an email. So it's just better to address dear editors something. My name is Daniel Groves, and my work appears in Hidden Peak Press, Bitchin' Kitchen, A Rusted Glass, and others. So this is a good line that you want to put right at the start. So you mention where you've been published before, and then throw this and others at the end. If you normally don't want to include any more than 3 to 5 specific names, but the and others is all encompassing, right? So they know, oh, okay, there's more than this. If you only have one publication, you just put the one name on there, and you go with that. And then I say a little bit about myself. I'm an MFA candidate at Concordia University, St. Paul, pursuing the goals of teaching and publishing multiple novels. Please consider the following story for publication in magazine name, story title. And then I include, this is a simultaneous submission, and I have included my third person bio at the bottom of this letter. Thank you for your consideration, and I look forward to hearing from you. So I send this exact same thing to everybody. I make alterations if they specifically request certain information or less information. But generally speaking, the only 2 things I have to change: magazine name, story title. Easy. Okay, and then my bio. Usually the publications will say, include your bio in your cover letter, make it 50 words or less, or 100 words or less. So this is 92 words, I want to say. So when somebody requires less, I just edit it down. But here's one of my bios. It says, Daniel Groves, he, him, is a writer from Ohio whose work appears in the press, Bitchin' Rusted Glass, and others. He's an MFA candidate at Concordia University, St. Paul. Is the EIC of the Golden Onion, is her editor in chief. Won the 2022 and 2023 Mass on the Public Library Poetry Contests and is working on his debut novel. When not writing, he masquerades as a left planner who enjoys spending time with his wife, reading, sports, F1, theater, and film. A complete list of his published work is available on shelf subs, and he's on X at Growth Editor. So here I include my credentials. I include a bit about myself, what I'm doing, and then some personality as well. And then where I'm. So 4 sentences, short and sweet. So templates are key to speeding up the submission process. Okay, and then I want to talk about some other helpful tools I found. So podcasts. There's one podcast called The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. It's run by a writer and 2 literary agents. So they are, definitely credentialed individuals. And they're not kidding. They tell you everything you need to know about writing. Their episodes are anywhere from an hour to 2 hours long. They will break down, you can submit your work to the podcast and they might break down your first few pages of your book and your query letter, which is a whole other thing that I won't get into, but they will talk about your work on the podcast, and then they usually have a guest that they have a particular topic that they're talking about. So great resource, all kinds of information available there from people in the publishing industry. Okay, and then the next 2 are podcasts not specifically about writing. The first one is called A Bit of Optimism, hosted by Simon Sinek, and the second one, Rethinking by Adam Grant. Simon Sinek runs a company called the Optimism Company, kind of a corporate training type thing. And then Rethinking by Adam Grant. Adam Grant is a organizational psychologist who teaches at the University of Pennsylvania. And both these guys, I just like the way they think and the way they talk and communicate, but they will occasionally interview writers on their podcast. So it's kind of like you get a different perspective on a writer's work and their process and what keeps them going, what motivates them. So a lot of good stuff there as well. And then you can also just search podcast episodes for a particular writer. So if there's somebody you want to learn more from, maybe they did a podcast episode somewhere that you don't know about. So you just search their name and the episodes will all pop up that they've appeared on. Okay, and the last slide here, I want to mention free writing conferences. So in going back to the poets and writers, Edwidge Danticar, right? This is on the cover page of Poets and Writers magazine. She was the keynote speaker this year at Incubator, presented by Literary Cleveland, which took place at the Cleveland Public Library, right downtown Cleveland. It was a completely free event. They had different things going on for like a week. It was over the course of an entire week. But the last 2 days, it was a Friday and Saturday, were kind of like a regular big conference where everybody comes in and there's different sessions you can attend. I found it to be a great resource. I attended one session that just completely changed the way I'm thinking about the first few pages of my novel. So I definitely recommend free writing conferences. There are other writing conferences as well that you have to pay for. Those can be kind of expensive. There's another one coming up in Cleveland later this month. It's like $300 to go to. So it's kind of a gamble there. It's like, hey, you don't really know what you're going to get. So I prefer to attend stuff that's free. The second one there is called Winter Wheat at Bowling Green State University. I'll actually be presenting this information there as well. It's this coming weekend. And it's a completely free event. They have there are more in-person sessions than Zoom sessions, but they do also have Zoom sessions as well. So you don't have to go to Bowling Green to be able to attend this conference, but it's totally free, and it's put on by the MFA program at Bowling Green State. And then literary centers. So Literary Cleveland. If you Google Literary Cleveland, you're going to find a ton of different resources, classes, speaker events, reading events, just all different kinds of things where you can go and talk to other writers, and maybe you can attend a writing workshop and work on something. Lots of opportunity through these literary centers as well. The second one there I learned about through the folks that are in my cohort of my MFA, because I attend a college in Minneapolis, but the program is fully online. And they told me about the Loft Literary Center. It's great, a lot of resources there as well. And then two others I found, Just Buffalo Literary Center in Buffalo, New York, and then Gotham Writers Workshop in New York City. So great resources. Highly recommend checking those out and just seeing what they have to offer. They touch on a lot of different subjects, from writing to publishing to finding an agent to keeping yourself motivated. Lots of good information coming out of literary centers. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Yes?
Do you have a literary agent?
I do not. I tried to get one. That was a very long process. I could honestly give a whole nother talk about my experience with that. But in short, I submitted, so I have written a book length manuscript. It's like 300 pages. And I submitted it to about 60 different agents. Of those 60, I had one that wanted to read more than what they requested up front. Most of them request like 5 to 10 pages of your book, and then they make a decision based on that, whether they want to read more. I had one that requested more. She requested, in her initial request, I submitted 5 pages, and then she wanted the first 50 pages. And then after that, she requested the rest of the book. which is kind of like the last hurdle, because after that, they're either going to say, yes, I'll represent you, or no, I won't represent you. So I was pretty excited to get to that point. But she ended up declining because she said she had recently taken on a similar project and didn't feel that she could represent both adequately. So a little disappointed by that. But the reason I mention all that is that whole process of her reading everything took about 1.5 years.
Right.
So it took a really long time
Yeah.
to get there.
Is it like, we're going to be a literary agent first, or is it more like,
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
is it recommended to get the agent first, or to get or if you have a novel, just go out to the publishers?
Yeah, so it depends on where you want to be published. So let me go back. Okay, so the traditional publishing route to the big five, you, as the author, cannot even submit to these publishers without an agent. The agent submits on your behalf.
Okay.
So if you want to go this route, you need an agent. And agents won't, you can't submit to agents until you have a whole book written.
Yeah.
So hence the taking a lot of time, right? Because you got to write the whole thing before you can even try to get an agent, and then the agent takes forever to read it. They accept it, then they submit to these people. But if you go for the independent presses or the university presses, they don't necessarily say you have to have an agent representing you to submit your work. You can submit directly to them yourself. And they're like Grey Wolf and Tin House are pretty big names in the independent press world. There are so many small presses out there as well. So tons of opportunity that you don't need an agent to submit to.
You know, I've seen this last week, but if you've been published with 4 agents, I'm more likely to look at your stuff.
They say no. They say it's based on the quality of the work, but I don't see how it would be possible, right? Like if I say I was published in the New Yorker, that's gonna have a bias with it.
Sure.
Right? They're gonna be like, oh, well, this work must be better because this person has good credentials.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, everybody will say, no, it doesn't matter, you know, where you've been published before, but I don't see how it can't.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what has inspired you to start your own online literary journal? Why have you done that?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to see what it was like from the other side of the coin, right? So I've been publishing, I've not been publishing, but I've been submitting for a long time. And you know, everything I've heard is that literary magazines just have so much work, and that's why it takes so long. Is that there's just so many more submissions than the people on the staff can handle. So I'm like, I don't see how that works. And I kind of want to, I want to, I want to read more work, and it's going to help my writing, right? By reading what everybody else is submitting, I can see what's popular and what's not popular, and see what's good and what's not good. And so it's been a fun experience so far. We actually just got listed on Shell Subs a couple days ago. Since then, we've had a number of submissions come in, but we started accepting submissions on September 24th, and we've received almost 100 submissions already. And yeah, like I started our Twitter account right away and just started following people and started posting, and people found us. But yeah, honestly, I just did it for fun. Yeah.
So can I ask another question?
Sure.
So the one thing that kind of disturbs me, alarms me, worries me, is this thing called ChatGPT.
Yes.
Yeah. Something that worries you?
Yes, it does. So I actually started at Hiram in the events department back in August, and before that I worked for a party rental company. And one of the guys that worked there, he was kind of in charge of hiring the warehouse team. And he came to me because he knew I was an English major. He's like, you know, can you proofread these emails I'm sending out? And then he's like, no, I'm gonna just have AI write it and send that. I'm like, no, don't do that. You can't do that. And yeah, it's scary because I have tried it myself because I want to see what it puts out so I can see what to avoid. And the stuff is actually really good. It's unfortunately good. I don't think it's terrible to use in terms of generating ideas or helping you to like create an outline. So a good example of something I did personally with ChatGPT. So I was working on a novel, one of my works in progress. I have like 5 of them right now. But I wanted to take this big diversion from the plot and have one of my characters tell a ghost story. And the ghost story is like a whole story by itself. But I'm like, I've never written a ghost story before. So I went into AI, I'm like, give me 10 ideas of different ghost stories. Like, just help me out here to get me going. And then I looked at all that information. I'm like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And then I built my own thing based on what I'd learned, right? So it had nothing to do with what was created by the AI, but I did use it as a tool to help me learn how to write a ghost story. And then I just kind of winged it from there. So it can be useful, but I don't think people are using it correctly right now.
I think the creative stuff that, at least my experience is like the creative stuff that comes out of like ChatGPT and other AI stuff is like often like pretty bad.
Oh, really?
Like, yeah, I mean, I found it trying to get like, I just found it like very stereotypical. Like it was, because it was pulling from all this stuff, and so it just gave me like the most generic, bland kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Like obviously, like so the grammar might be good. There,
right. Yeah. I guess that's what I was thinking. Yeah. But yeah, you're right.
Itself is kind of like really bland.
Yeah. What worries me is right, generate content so easily that these small presses get overwhelmed with submissions.
Right. So yeah, I did include a line in our submission guidelines that specifically says we do not accept anything that is AI generated. Most literary magazines are including that in submission guidelines now to avoid it. And I haven't had any, as far as I know, I haven't had any submitted yet, but most of what's submitted is, not super great. So I'm like, oh, that's definitely not AI.
What are your, like, as you're reading through and deciding, which pieces to select, like, do you have a criteria already in mind, or
So
is it
I went into this thinking I want to use this as an opportunity to read work I normally wouldn't. So I tend to read literary fiction, contemporary fiction. My world is pretty small in terms of what I choose when I'm choosing a book, right? So I'm like, I'm going to use this to expand that. So my guidelines are very, not generic, but like all inclusive. Like I want, it doesn't matter what your genre is, like send it my way, I want to read it. And so I guess when I'm choosing what to accept, it's just, kind of what connects with me. I don't really have a rule sheet that I follow, but just, hey, if I like it, And I also work with one of the other students in my MFA program, and we've set it up to where she's got a lot going on in her life right now. So I'm primarily the first reader. And if I like something, I'll save it, and then she'll come along later and read it. And we both have to agree on, yes, we want to publish this. And she reads very differently from me. So the one story we've published so far, we both were like, yes, we want that, absolutely. Yes.
Can you describe the process and or struggle of like getting your very first thing published, like in the magazine or whatever?
Yeah.
Very first.
My very first thing. Trying to let me jog my memory here.
Especially like how long it took, like how many.
Yeah. Which one was first? Is that one? Okay. Yeah, I had a college professor at Kent State who kind of introduced me to the world of literary magazines, and just said to start throwing your work out there. So I guess I went into it with low expectations, not assuming that I was going to be accepted right away. I didn't realize how long the process would take. But I'm like, if I get rejected, it doesn't matter. It's whatever. So I don't necessarily know if I would say that I like struggled to get my first work accepted.
Was it a really passive process for you?
Was it a passive process?
Yeah. You make it sound like you were just idly sending them out, but I don't think that's probably the case.
So
It took concerted effort.
yeah, I would say it did take a lot of effort. Really, it's just sitting down and putting in the time is the big thing. The work itself is not complicated in terms of submitting. I know writing is a complicated process, but submitting, you just have to, put in the time and the effort to do it. And like I said earlier, the more you submit, the better your chances are. First. Yeah. But I don't think necessarily that getting the first one accepted at a magazine is any more difficult than the 100th one.
Oh, okay.
Then the 100th, yeah.
I would assume it would be easier to sort of really get some improve this.
So, well, maybe I can speak from my, having seen other people's work. I do request a cover letter be sent when somebody submits to our magazine, but I kind of just give it a glance. I don't really read it like super in depth. So I do specifically request. So my kind of mission for the magazine is to help new and unpublished writers get their first work out there in the world. So I do request for people to tell me if they've got 3 publications or less. And then if I do end up rejecting work from those people, I usually give them some feedback to kind of help them along. That's not been my experience with most other magazines. Most of the time you just get a one line, sorry, we're not accepting your work, good luck. And that's all you get. And that's not helpful. Like, how do I make this better? I don't know what you didn't like about it. So yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to do this talk and why I've built the magazine the way I have. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If you have some work, you can send it my way.
Are our submissions open?
Always open. Yep. I don't have a submission window.
You did right. No.
Was there another question?
Yeah, so I'm curious if this is common. So I had a friend who, she submitted a piece to a contest, but it was more like, I don't know, you didn't have to submit the whole manuscript, like it was for a novel.
Okay, yep.
And it actually was for her, so she got accepted to like the further round. And that actually was really helpful for her motivation to actually finish the manuscript.
Okay, yeah.
So I don't know how many of those kind of contests happen, but that was an experience that she had.
Yes, I would say I've got a little experience with contests. Like I said, I tend to not participate because they're expensive, but occasionally I'll, find one. Like I'm actually going to participate in one this weekend. It cost me like $40 to sign up, and it's a contest where they give you 48 hours to write a 250-word story. But they provide feedback on the story. They give feedback to every single story that's submitted to the contest. So the way I look at it is I'm like, okay, if I don't get picked to move on, at least I'm paying $40 for feedback on this story. Right. So I feel like most contests do include some capacity of feedback, which is valuable at the end of the day. But on the flip side of that is that it's feedback from 1 or 2 specific people, and what they do or don't like about your story might be completely different from what somebody else does or does not like about the same work.
Yeah, it was a Simon and Schuster contest, and it was like for a new print that they were doing, and she submitted. I think she ended up going to like the final round, but was eventually like rejected. Or didn't win the contest. Yeah. Eventually, she got it published.
Yeah. That's cool.
But it was really helped her, like, oh, I have to get this manuscript done.
Yeah,
motivation.
The deadline, yeah.
Another resource that could be helpful for writers is Brandon Sanderson. He's a fantasy writer. He's a YouTube channel, and he actually teaches like creative writing.
Oh, really? Okay.
In I think like University of Utah or like Utah State, and he has like his class was recorded.
Okay.
And put up on his website.
That's cool. That would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
I've actually never considered that.
yeah,
On YouTube.
He has a bio on the website too that goes over his publishing journey.
yeah.
Cool. Are there any other questions?
All
Okay.
right.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You sure gonna publish it, right? Yeah.
You started using a different camera?
Your stories on.
That is the one that, Martin let me